Hey, welcome back to Doodle Notes, and we are going to do a doodle-rific visualization of, of the Reconstruction era and some of the hardships and some of the turmoil that I wouldn't even call turmoil, some of the hardships and some of the obstacles that people of color had to go through to attain equality. When I say equality, I mean looking at people in the same way you look at everybody else. So you're not defining people by the color of their skin or by their religion or by their height or by anything else that you can think of that you might discriminate or look at somebody in a way that is less than the same way you'd look at everybody else. So we're going to do this by creating a graphic organizer. And that graphic organizer is going to have some pretty pictures on here. We're going to do some neat things. And to help us out, we're going to have a couple colors. Now, as always, I've got my trusty Sharpie right here. I've got a yellow color. So get that yellow out. I got a cool gray. You may not have a gray, but a really light blue might work instead. A red, because red always means conflict. And then a green. This means growth or progress, or this is what I use to connect ideas because one idea grows into another sometimes. So we're going to start off by doing some origami. Now, I know if you're in my classroom, you might say, why do we have to do this? Well, you have to do this because I said so. But realistically, the more that we can manipulate things with our hands, the better we are able to, it stretches our mind a little bit. It allows us to do something besides just writing things down. We're actually creating and building something. And by doing this, we're actually going to allow ourselves to build a graphic organizer that is spaced more neatly on the paper. And a lot of people they don't have those spatial reasoning skills to just do it on their own. So when we fold the paper, we can make things really even. And you notice how I fold this right in half. I'm going to fold it in half again. I'm going to give myself a little crease here. Okay. And then I'm going to open it up and look what I did. I've got this broken up into 4 parts now, and they're equal. Imagine that. Equality, equal. Ha, ha, ha. You got it? Perfect. Okay. Now, we're going to do it again. This is the part that's going to blow your mind because you don't have to just fold hamburger way. You can fold hot dog way too. And I'm going to fold this bad boy like this. And I'm going to do it again because I can. And you're going to do it again because I told you so. Okay. Now, we've got a paper that has a crazy amount of squares, but they're all equal squares. It's going to allow us, like I said, to even this out, and it's going to give us an opportunity to better organize our information because we're going to put a lot of information on this thing. And this is where I break out the old trusty Sharpie. Make sure it's got ink, otherwise it's going to make you frustrated. All the time I pick up a Sharpie, and half the time it didn't have ink in it. I sit there and keep drawing. I'm getting angry and angry and angry, and I start turning into the Incredible Hulk. We're not going to do that today. We're going to just use a good Sharpie. As I say that, my Sharpie probably doesn't work. Okay, so all these, we're going to use these squares all the way up, except in the first one, because we're actually going to give ourselves a little extra space down here to write. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our finger right on this crease, and we're going to give ourselves an extra half an inch or inch or so. And we're going to make a little tick mark. Now that's where your line would have been. See that? And I just took a finger and I spread it out. Now, if your finger is really small, don't worry about it. Just give yourself a little bit, maybe a fourth of the way up. That's kind of your guideline here. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to eyeball. Actually, I don't have to eyeball. I'll just take a fourth right here and put it right here. And now I'm going to connect these 2 lines. Doesn't be perfect, but you know what? That gives me a little extra space to write down here. So I'm going to put a word down here, a definition, and I want to make sure I got room. And now I'm going to go to this spot here, and I'm going to make my first line match up with the second line. And I'm going to go to this spot here where these next cube is. I'm going to draw another line I'm going to go up here and do it again. Can you guess what I'm making here? I'm making a staircase. And the staircase, I don't want it to go into a nowhere. So I'm going to, once again, I'm going to limit myself this little finger trick. And then I'm going to give a little room at the top. And there you go. A perfect, beautiful set of stairs. Okay. And then I'm going to do something that's really going to blow your mind. And you're going to have a hard time understanding why I'm writing this down like this. But once I start drawing, it's going to make a sense. We're gonna take a circle and we're going to put a circle right here. So here's your first point, your second point, right here in the second point, and we're going to make a circle. Okay. And it doesn't have to be just, I'd make it where it's kind of tipping, like it's on a seal's nose. So I'm going to go ahead and do this right here on my tip, the corner there. I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to draw that circle. I want to say as big as I can, but big enough to write in because I'm going to put some words in there. Now, is it a perfect circle? No. But if you really are worried about it, you can put something on top of it. I got a coffee cup. It's a little bit too big, but you know what? Maybe a paper cup if you really got desperate. It could be something like this. Hey, that's pretty close. But otherwise, just eyeball and do the best job you can, which is really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get you to do the best job you can. And so I'm going to label this. I'm going to put the words in here. Equality. For African Americans. And, earlier in Reconstruction doodles, I'll make mention of former slaves. And I use that as almost like a, well, not necessarily a vocab word, but because mostly African Americans in America at that point were former slaves. But I want to broaden that a little bit to just the term African Americans, because these problems grew past just those years after Reconstruction, after the Civil War, and they grew into a bigger issue, a longer issue that took us all the way. In some cases, some people feel to modern day, but I'd say the height of it, the really biggest focus would be like 1950s and 1960s with the civil rights marches and people like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and stuff. So this doesn't go away, even though we're talking about the area right after the Civil War, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. We are still talking about a problem that would persist for many years after that time period. So I'm going to put equality for African Americans. And I screwed up already. I wrote Americans instead. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to fix it. That way. If you're smart, you'll put African Americans beforehand, but I kind of messed it up. So we're going to go with this. And this is the first time I'm going to use color, because I want to document the simple fact that this pursuit of equality is going to be tied to conflict. Lots and lots of conflict. And that conflict wasn't necessarily perpetuated or driven or created by the people who were looking for equality. A lot of it was driven by the people who were trying to deny equality. And typically in history, when you look at anyone who's had power for a long time, they don't usually want to give it up willingly. And that's what we have in the South. We have a struggle for power between the people who used to own slaves and the people who used to be slaves. And that conflict was pretty one-sided for many years, obviously leaning to the favor of the people who used to own the slaves. But over time, we've made a lot of progress in that area, and that's a whole different lesson. But right now, we're talking about this time period, and I'm going to draw a guy pushing his way up these stairs, because the idea is we're trying to we got an uphill battle for this. So we're going to create this fella right here, my silhouette figure, because I don't want to put a lot of detail into drawing people. It's kind of hard to make this look like a guy. But it kind of does, doesn't it? So this person is pushing us up the hill, and he's thinking, wow, this sure is an uphill battle. Now I'm going to put that into what I call a think cloud. And think clouds are one of those things they kind of pop up over your head in the comic books, and like you're wondering, I wonder what this means, or I wonder what that is. We'll use think clouds to look at a topic and try to create questions that make us think, I wonder what this is all about. Well, I'm trying to create that thinking by making a statement that'll hopefully make you ask a question as you look back over your notes. Uphill battle. Why was this an uphill battle? What things were making the battle so uphill? And what were the problems? Well, the problem is the pursuit of equality is not going very good. And so it's an uphill battle, and there are several things, big, major obstacles to getting that equality where it should be. So let's talk about these different things. The first thing we're going to talk about is something called segregation. And I'm going to start down here, right at the top. And some of you probably already know what segregation was, but I'm going to put this in my little cabal box. And if you want to know what segregation is, I'll give you a picture to go along with it. You don't have to add it if you really don't want to, but I'm going to draw it because some people really need those visuals. And if you understand what segregation is, the other vocab words will make a little more sense. But segregation is nothing more than separating a race, class, or group from the rest of society. So when we do that, I'm going to do another one of those little think aloud things here. I'm going to draw myself a bubble here. Make a little connection. And I use the example of restrooms. And I know most people have all had to use the bathroom. If you use the bathroom, you know that there's usually a little picture that tells you which restroom is best for you. But there was a time when those restrooms were labeled as white only bathrooms, and they might have a bathroom labeled for people of color. And unfortunately, this was something that was not just something that happened in the South, but happened all over the country. And we'll get into some reasons why and how that worked out, but especially the South. Especially the South. Add a little color there, my little cloud, my Think-A-Light. my think aloud here. And we know what segregation is. Okay, well, segregation is directly connected to this idea of what Jim Crow was. And Jim Crow is a nickname for specific kinds of laws. And I'm going to once again put my kapow box. And if you don't know what Jim Crow is, Jim Crow has a very distinct connection to segregation. So I'm going to go ahead and put a big connection here. I put my big arrows there because I want to remind myself of that connection. And since it's an important term, I'm going to give myself a little yellow here. And because this term is so well connected to segregation, and segregation helped create or progress certain laws known as Jim Crow, I'm going to use green. And Jim Crow laws are basically a nickname. You know what a nickname is, like Pookie Bear and Sweetums. Well, Jim Crow isn't so sweet. Nickname for any law that was used to segregate people. Based on their race. So there may actually be laws that say black people can't go in this door, or there might be certain laws that say black people can't be in the same schools, or it might be whatever. But this was a nickname, Jim Crow laws that were designed to segregate or keep people apart. Now, people get this very, very confused with things like black codes, and they're not the same thing. Black codes, and if you don't know what a code is another word for a law. And I know we think sometimes secret codes and stuff, well, it's a little different meaning. But black codes really worked hand in hand with Jim Crow laws. Even though they weren't focused on segregation so much, they were focused on finding ways to limit the freedoms of African Americans. So these are discriminatory laws. And if you don't know what discriminatory is, it's an offshoot of discrimination, and discrimination is something we use to limit people, or to, I would say, treat a group unfairly. And that's how it's used in society. Technically, if you discriminate against something, that's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on how the word is used. I mean, I discriminate against onions because I don't like onions. I don't want to eat them. If something's got onions in it, I won't have it. That doesn't make me a racist. It just means that I don't like onions. Well, being discriminatory when you talk about society and different groups of people, that usually is used in a pretty harmful way. But we can use discrimination against women. We can use discrimination amongst men. You can discriminate against people for having glasses. You can discriminate against people for liking the Cubs instead of the Cardinals, whatever it is. There's lots of ways you can discriminate, but we're talking about specific codes that were created to discriminate against people for basically being black. And these laws, once again, limited. And I want to underline the word limited, just like I'm going to come down here and underline the word segregate. They limited freedom of African Americans. That's it. Now I'm going to connect you to a couple terms here. And I'm going to connect you. I'm going to doctor this up just because I know you're probably catching up with all the other vocab. So I got a little more time to make my stuff prettier. But I'm going to use green to draw this arrow because I want to make sure you understand the connections, because these discriminatory laws grew into all kinds of creative ways that would help the people in power limit the people who didn't have power. And these might be things like having curfew laws. So if you're out past a certain time, you could actually be arrested for that. And if you're arrested, you'd be given a big fine. And if you're given a big fine, we could now make you work that fine off. So it's kind of a way to force you into labor. It might be a vagrancy law. If you don't have a job, well, that's no problem, but it's illegal. And if you don't have a job and you're breaking the law, you go to jail. Now you pay a fine, and now you got to work that fine off somewhere. And it could be something like a labor contract, where you can force people into labor contracts, and if they don't live up to every single tiny word on that contract, they don't get paid. So in reality, you have just gotten work out of somebody, forced them to do it, and not paid them, which I'm not sure if you know what slavery is, but that sounds pretty darn familiar to that definition. So these are all things that are tied to, or could be tied to, examples of various black codes. Okay. And the last thing we're going to put up here, and I think it's a big one, something that validated all this stuff. And anytime you have a legal court case, especially the Supreme Court, that makes a decision, they will validate, or they will say all this is okay. They give you the green light to do it. And in this case, the Supreme Court we're going to mention is a case called Plessy versus Ferguson. This happened in 1896. And once again, this is a vocab word that we want to remember. It's a big term that we don't want to forget. And we're going to give that a kapow box. Kapow box. That's how I should say it from here on. Kapow box. I don't think that really entertains people as much as it entertains me, but I'm going to do it anyway. Because I'm in this room all by myself, and I'll make this how I want to. Okay. So I'm going to color in my kapow box with yellow. And I want to remind myself that this is actually a Supreme Court case. Or I should say a Supreme Court ruling. When you have a ruling, that is the judgment on a Supreme Court case. So I'm sitting here looking, what is Plessy versus Ferguson? Oh, wait a minute. It's a Supreme Court case ruling. This is a decision they made. This is the law of the land. This is how the Supreme Court interprets laws. And what happened in Plessy versus Ferguson is the idea of separating races was being challenged in court. And a decision was brought up that said it was perfectly legal to separate races, or we're just going to say to segregate, as long as equal, and I'm going to put that in parentheses because it was never, ever going to be equal. We're going to say equal facilities were provided for both groups. So if you don't know what I'm trying to say, is that would be this made it legal to send kids to a white school and kids to a black school. You can separate them. Now, this would be the law of land from 1896 all the way to the 1950s. So almost 60 years went by until the case was challenged again and it was struck down in something called Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas. And that's a famous court case that said that this was illegal. They overturned their own case, the Supreme Court did. But it took a lot for that to happen. But it did lead into this concept, something that dominated Jim Crow South. It's a term called separate but equal. And this is the same kind of mentality that was used for, think of the bus incident with Rosa Parks. If you know anything about history, you know anything about Rosa Parks, you know that she refused to give up her seat, was arrested, and led to major boycotts of the busing system in Montgomery, Alabama, and eventually led or forced the city to change their policies. Now, were black people allowed to sit on the bus? Sure, but they had to sit in a different section, and that's where the term sit in the back of the bus comes from. But more importantly than the section they had to sit in, they still had to give up their seat to a white person if that white person wanted their seat, which wasn't fair at all. Now, that particular issue was not struck down by the Supreme Court, but it was challenged through peaceful means, civil disobedience, different things like that, which in turn, and I go back to the word civil disobedience, would slowly start to erode at these things over time. And eventually the Supreme Court came through and they made their decisions, and then you had a few, some people in the federal government that got more supportive of the idea of equality, and a lot of things started to happen over time, but it took many years for that to actually come to pass. So anyway, just a quick review. We're talking about equality for African Americans, and we're talking about how this uphill battle is really tough, and it's because of things like segregation that separated people, Jim Crow laws that made that segregation happen, black codes that out and out discriminated people with curfew laws and vagrancy laws and labor contracts, which could literally force you into labor without being paid. Just another form of slavery. And then you've got that all being reaffirmed with a Supreme Court case called Plessy versus Ferguson that established the idea of separate but equal. And that was the law of the land for many years. So that's it. That is our quick down and dirty notes on some of these vocab words and how they're connected together and how they created some of the problems for equality. And actually, a lot of this is a real dark time for U.S. history and some of our choices, and really an attack on the institution of liberty and freedom and what the Constitution is supposed to be all about. So we have to learn these things so we better understand not to let them happen again. And that's where we're at. So that's it. If you have any questions, obviously you've got a whole world of Google you can go to. You can try to email me through my YouTube channel. And other than that, good luck. And if you have questions, just keep on keeping on, I guess. Thank you. Goodbye.